Open-ended. We are on the lunch break on today's evidence at the Undercover Policing Inquiry. We have just finished hearing from Roger Geffen, who joins me right here.
Hi, Tom.
It's always the best to have the actual witness to come and talk about what's just happened rather than just somebody who was watching. How do you feel it went?
I am pretty pleased with how it went. I feel I did, in fact, get to say what I wanted to say. There's always that moment when you kind of calm down afterwards, when the adrenaline subsides. It hasn't yet. I'm still kind of a little hyped. I was stopped at various points by the counsel to the inquiry, the legal representative of the chair of the inquiry, who stopped me a few times, say, "Slow down." I was trying to get through a lot of stuff. I had, I think, the right level of adrenaline to strike that balance between being a little bit on edge, kind of having my brain working, full speed, whilst actually getting through what I wanted to. But there will come a point where I just calm down and think, "Oh, I've missed this, that, and the other," but I hope I've done what I set out to do.
Yeah, I think you did a very good job. I think that the lawyer was particularly poor today. This is often the case that we, as watchers of the inquiry, are frustrated by the line of questioning that's being chosen. I think that was very much the case today. It was very notable that it took until just before the first break for a question about Jim Boylan to actually arise. There was a lot of questions about violence. I see no need to go over them again, but we get this repetition. The idea is, I guess, or just to give them their best, is that they're presenting questions that have come from the lawyers for the police officer, and they're heading off any sort of attempts he might make when he's being questioned about claiming that you or the Reclaim the Streets were violent. But it is very frustrating to watch, and must have been even more frustrating to actually be questioned. I think it was 12 times you were asked if Reclaim the Streets were violent.
Yes. Well, firstly, I hope that I persistently gave the answer. No, there was absolutely no basis on grounds of so-called public disorder for the invasive policing that we and other movements like us were subjected to, that the police had pretty clear whole set of other reasons for doing what they were doing, for using the intelligence to create situations in which disorder was actually more likely, not less likely, to occur, to tarnish our reputation, to sow discord within the movement, and to protect their own interests and their organizational and individual roles as spy cops. It was a great jolly for them, and they had to protect their roles. So they seem to have used their intelligence far more for those reasons than for anything to do with actually averting disorder. So, it does seem to me that the police have now admitted and given apologies for so many of the other outrages, for taking dead children's names, for spying, intruding on on individuals with whom they had relationships, marriages, children, and all the rest of it. And spying on justice campaigns and all of those things. They've admitted that was wrong, but they still have not admitted that they still hang on to this defense of their role, that there were these groups engaged in public disorder. And we and the Hubsabs were other groups. And so I really felt that my key role was to absolutely demolish that line of argument, to sort of withdraw, if you like, the last prop from the police's defense of their role. And I hope I've done that. That was the one thing above all that I wanted to do today.
Yeah, I think you did a very good job of that. I was also really impressed with how you ended when you were asked if there's anything else you'd like to say. And you really went through so many of the questions that so many of us have about the way in which the undercover police operated, what they were actually up to. And I think one of the ones which I've picked up numerous times, people know on these videos, is that the way in which the undercover police had a real strategy of discrediting, undermining, and ultimately destroying social movements, sowing discord, attempting to putting intelligence together that could be used to drive a wedge between groups to split them apart. And I think so far there has been no acknowledgement of that reality, that tactical reality that the SDS and the NPOIU were using. But it's so very clear, isn't it?
Yes, it's one of those things where on the one hand I'm reluctant to grant them that power, but the reality is that Reclaim the Streets did end up fizzling out by 2002. I think that clearly they were doing things. What is really clear is they were doing things to undermine our ability to get our message out, arresting 3 of us at the point when we were about to distribute the Evading Standards newspaper with all those fabulous creative messages about what was wrong with, just voting for once every 5 years on everything that matters in the world. That that is not a good form of democracy. What we wanted to promote with our consensus decision making, all the rest of it, where you listen to people, you don't just shout people down, you don't just vote 52 to 48 and make decisions that way. You listen to people's concerns and try and modify the process. All of that stuff. That's what we were about, and they stopped us getting that message out. And that's what they were more intent on doing, that and creating a situation where we failed to have our little 2 days of activity in the former building of the Department of Environment, which would have been so eloquent, and they deprived us of that. And I gather, I haven't seen Monica's evidence from yesterday, but I gather that she was shown that for the first time while she was in the witness box, and she responded so powerfully, I gather, to the evidence that that's what Jim Boylan was actually doing. And I just want to pay tribute, to what she evidently has been through and what she evidently said yesterday. I haven't even seen it yet, but for all the accounts I've heard of her evidence yesterday, wow.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. She was incredibly powerful, and that was a really emotional moment when she was presented with that bit of evidence. The lawyer actually was, "Oh no, that's the wrong one. Take it down." She was like, "Actually, can I read this?" And then she read it, and that was the first time. It was a piece of disclosure that wasn't disclosed to her, despite it being very relevant. Obviously, that was the very day that Jim Boylan deceived her into a sexual relationship for the first time. Yes. And what he did that day literally preceded those moments. So obviously incredibly important for her own personal story. Yes. Ridiculous that the inquiry hadn't disclosed it to her before, and incredibly emotional and powerful for her to react to it in the moment whilst it was being broadcast live. Yes. Deeply moving. And I mean, what she expressed at that moment, that, I mean, it struck a chord with me as someone who was also, that was the beginning of my political activism myself around that time. I wasn't there that day, but lots of other things around that time. This sense that, this is what we were trying to do. We were prevented from doing it. And what has happened since? I mean, I think you articulate that really well, particularly about climate change. That if only 40 years ago we'd been listened to, maybe there'll be a better chance of preventing what looks like, us all going to hell in a handcart. I mean, I find that particular question, about like what we've lost, that stolen future, yes. which not just the spy cops, but the whole sort of infrastructure repression that yes. the state have deployed against us yes. has really resulted in. And I think you did a really good job of like, bringing that into focus, particularly yes. with those questions at the end. Yeah.
And we still are. We're still facing this. As I said, even when the security services themselves are trying to publish a report about the ecological and climate emergency that we're now facing, the government suppresses it. And it took the Green Alliance putting in a freedom of information request to get that out into the public domain. So we're still facing the inability to get this stuff out. Even the security services themselves are struggling to get this stuff out, and it should have come out 30 years ago. And we should have been taking action. We might, who knows how much of this climate catastrophe that we seem to be headed for could have been averted if only this stuff was listened to and acted on 30 years ago when we and other movements like us were first saying it.
Yeah, absolutely. You were the first witness at the undercover police inquiry to be asked questions about Mark Kennedy, the first one about any National Public Order Intelligence Unit officer. Right. Yes. It was we're finally getting to possibly the reason why this inquiry was ended up being called in the first place, to actually get into those moments. It may be quite a long time before there are further questions about him, sure. because who knows when Tranche 4 is going to happen. I think it's, it was, events that I think all of us are, fairly familiar with, but really kind of, the impact of the Camp for Climate Action, which, was so important, I think, in the movement.
Incredible. Yeah. No, it was an incredibly powerful movement to be part of. Everything I've been involved with, whatever oppression and repression and whatever we faced, it's been worth it for the people you get to know through these movements, the people with real commitment, real vision, real ideas, inspiring people with a real sense of moral fiber, integrity, vision, wonderful people to do things with. Yeah, no, the networks that form around these movements are just so powerful. And it's so heartbreaking when you see people like Monica, Rosa, and others whose lives are just blown apart by, trying to take a stand for that vision that we were all trying to do. And what did the police do in response? It's awful. And my heart goes out to Monica for being put on the spot in the way she was yesterday, confronted, after everything she said about what she's faced in her own life, to be put on the spot and expected to give an answer to something she'd not been seen before. And the fact that she responded so magnificently is awesome. But it also goes to the heart of the inquiry process, that she was put on the spot with a document that should have been disclosed to her. How many other documents have we all not seen disclosure of because we weren't personally named, because the groups that people were involved in were not granted core participant status? I named a whole bunch of groups, Indie Media, Wombles, Descent, Rising Tide, Lark, indeed Snooze in Brighton was one I forgot to mention during the hearing. There were so many groups that would have wanted to see this evidence and would have been helped if only they could have seen it. The evidence that was disclosed to us, because it mentioned Reclaim the Streets, but other groups that were mentioned, other individuals who were mentioned, were not car participants, so they did not get to see it, and we could not share it because of the restriction orders that we were now under, and therefore we weren't able to share with other people the process of piecing together this incomplete jigsaw where different people were given different pieces of the jigsaw, not always the people who could most make sense of this piece of the jigsaw, and with some of the pieces of the jigsaw not given to any of us. That's hugely frustrating. That has undermines the ability of this inquiry to fulfill its own terms of reference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're completely right. It felt quite rushed this morning. You only got half a day. Somewhat ridiculous. I mean, I do feel that there have been other witnesses who maybe had less to offer who were given a whole day. I don't understand why you haven't been given a full day. I think the lack of witnesses being called, the fact there's only 3 witnesses, civilian witnesses about Jim Boyling's deployment. Just to give a reference, when it was Peter Francis, there were 12 civilian witnesses called before he gave, which I think is something which the inquiry got quite wrong. I think that because it was so rushed, we didn't get often when people are being questioned, we're shown contemporaneous items from the time, and there's so much fantastic, creative, genuinely beautiful stuff that movements, particularly Reclaim the Streets, but so many of those related ones, created that we didn't see any of that video. We saw a few flyers and leaflets, but there were so many others.
Absolutely.
I know people have been sharing them online whilst the evidence is going on. Just if you're not following Dick Penderyn on Twitter, please do. She's been sharing loads and loads of images from the time about that. And I think really bringing home to people, I really encourage people to watch the videos of the old Reclaim the Streets street parties.
Yes. I mean, what the Reclaim the Streets parties did, sort of Camden, Islington, particularly the M41, were just so beautiful, so visionary. For me personally, everybody who was involved in those things has their personal moments of like what really mattered to you. For me, the moment when I arrived on the Islington street party, it chokes me up even now. This pink armored personnel carrier that somehow the K Foundation's group had managed to get this personnel carrier onto Islington Upper Street, and there it was with a sound system playing "What a Wonderful Life." I still choke up even now. On a beautiful, warm, blue sky day. It was so it so expressed everything that we were standing for.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to get across to people that Reclaim the Streets was about that celebration of life against death, against the destruction of the planet, against the extraction of fossil fuels and the destruction of climate change, and how joyful these events were.
Absolutely, yeah. It was all about once you take away these cars, that I talked about this whole idea of the car as a way of communicating what's wrong with capitalism. The car is this thing that destroys the spaces that the streets that children would play in, that endangers them, pollutes the air, causes their asthma, produces waste tires, as well as waste, gross national waste product from the exhaust pipe, and goodness is it gross. All of those ways of using the car to communicate what is wrong with capitalism, and of course requires military expenditure to defend the supply lines of oil to perpetuate car culture. That is what Margaret Thatcher at the time was talking about as the great car economy, a phrase that's been forgotten now, but was very much in people's minds at the time. And to be able to transform a motorway into a place where children could play in the street, this is the alternative to the great car economy. And that is why I think the car, in a way, was such a wonderful emblem of why we are confronting capitalism and wanting to present this alternative where children can play, where you can celebrate, where you can enjoy life, where you can plant saplings from the sweet chestnut tree from the M11 campaign. We didn't get to talk about the fact that at the end of the M41 street party, there was these fantastic sort of 8-foot-high wooden dome-shaped frames draped with sort of crinoline sort of dresses like Marie Antoinette dresses, and a woman at the top of this wooden frame regally waving to the crowd. But underneath that crinoline frame were people digging a trench in the motorway that made sure that it couldn't be reopened to motor vehicles straight away afterwards. And then there were saplings from the sweet chestnut tree on George Green on the route of the M41 being planted on the M41 motorway. We had so much symbolism in what we were doing. Some of it was very personal and not necessarily well publicized, but there were all these things that meant so much to the people who were doing it. That there we were on the M41 creating an alternative to a traffic-filled sewer.
No, and I mean, I really can't stress enough how kind of how visual these events. I mean, you almost can't imagine these things happening now. That like what has happened over the last 20+ years in terms of political repression and the destruction of the kind of social movements that we were part of, that were able to manifest themselves in these ways. And it what the undercover police and all these other things related to them have done in destroying those movements has like deprived people of the opportunity to really sort of imagine these alternative ways of living that were so present at that time.
Absolutely. And movements that have come later echoed some of that. When Extinction Rebellion was first starting, the fact they too, the media at first, when they first held their first rebellion, and the media were trying to demonize them as terrorists, but actually the footage that went out was they had a pink boat in Oxford Circus and they were dancing around it. And people who saw that, no, I'm not going to hate them as terrorists. I want to join in. It was very much, that was very much echoing the spirit of what we were doing. It requires so much creativity to kind of fight back against that oppression of space, and just massive respect to the way that Defend Our Juries have now managed to turn terrorism. I talked about the process where what had been civil, forcing the government to take out injunctions, became criminal when Michael Howard passed his Criminal Justice Act, criminalising aggravated trespass and so much else besides. Then Jack Straw turned it into terrorism, to the point where people are now being arrested in their thousands for simply holding up a sign.
I mean, it is gross. And I think there's a real contrast about the creativity of the movement and then the creativity of the undercover police in spinning this narrative, in creating this story, which paints the people behind the streets and the like as terrorists. I mean, it takes quite a lot of creativity to get to that point as well, really, in its own way, Yeah,
well, I mean, it's clearly their playbook. It's been going on. It had been going on for long before I was probably, certainly, at least from the time of my very early childhood, certainly well before I was involved in this stuff. Who knows how long it was going on, even before 1968. This inquiry is exposing how much of that was going on, the demonization of movements, the hyping up of the threat of violence in order to give the police the budgets that they needed to engage in this sort of stuff, persuading the Home Secretary right back in 1968 that if they didn't provide a budget for the SDS to be set up in the first place, all hell would break loose. And then, you know, that just set them free to do all this utterly political policing, make out that it was us that were the threat to public order, us that were the threat to democracy, when in fact we were trying to build public support for a better way of doing democracy than just having one vote every 5 years, to really make sure that people were listened to when they were raising, you know, concerns about the threat to our common future and this wonderful planet which we happen to be lucky enough to live on.
There really is a dark poetry, really, to the way in which the SDS exaggerated the perceived risk constantly of social movements, whilst at the same time obscuring and undermining the message of the very real threat of climate change to all our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you did a fantastic job. On the, you know, I've seen all the witnesses now, and I think you did it particularly well. I mean, I don't want to dwell on it, but I think the questions you were given were very frustrating. You showed a patience that I would have not had, I must admit. People watching my commentary on Twitter might have been, I did get quite a bit, very irritated, shall we say, with the lawyer and some of the downright rude. I mean, asking you to give more brief answers when I think you were giving very full, very detailed answers of very relevant details, you know, all the way throughout.
Well, yes, it was quite frustrating because, you know, I'd met counsel to inquiry beforehand, and he was please give short answers. If anything, I was trying to make sure I covered as much ground as possible in answering the questions. So there I was, sort of, you know, moving the debate on, moving the discussion on to questions that he was probably going to come to next, and then he kept taking me backwards whilst also saying please speed up, and I just felt I was being pulled in two completely different directions. Speed up, no, slow down.
Yes, I mean, literally that's exactly what it was like. Very frustrating. This afternoon we'll have GRD, not their real name, strangely enough, a pseudonym, but someone else who was involved in Reclaim the Streets.
Yes.
I'm unsure what's going to be covered. Again, they've only got half a day, so I'm not sure how much will be covered with that. Is there anything else you'd like to add about your evidence this morning?
No, I will just say that I am aware from having now seen GRD's evidence, which I presume is now in the public domain.
Technically, as soon as he starts being questioned, it will be. So theoretically, it's not yet, but I mean, almost. Almost. I
will withhold. I am aware that GRD will be saying some things about their role in Reclaim the Streets that I think will also be very newsworthy. I hope so. I mean, actually, on the newsworthy element, and I mean, I think this comes back to what you were saying earlier about indie media and Schnews, absolutely,
and all the independent media that was really the backbone of disseminating the information about the movement, because the mainstream press has never been interested in telling the truth about the kind of social movements we're involved in, and the lack generally of I mean, apart from the Guardian.
Yes, I was going to say honourable exceptions.
Honourable exceptions aside,
to the Guardian.
And Rob Evans.
Yes, absolutely. Rob Evans, Paul
Lewis.
Paul Lewis, who've done a fantastic job both in their coverage but also in their book about the spy cops. You know, they have been tenacious. There have been other bits of the sort of the non-mainstream media who have reported this, but I also want to thank you, Tom, for everything you've done following this inquiry and playing your part in getting the word out about what is coming to light, because this inquiry, you know, it's had so much less profile than the Hillsborough inquiry, the Post Office inquiry, the infected blood inquiry, all of these inquiries that, you know, the state seems, again, this common playbook of slow the inquiry down so that by the time the inquiry concludes, some people who would have wanted to give evidence have died, some of the people who were guilty have died, and society as a whole has kind of forgotten what it was all about. And, you know, the very fact that the spy cops themselves spent years at the start of this inquiry arguing about whether they should be given privacy in order to be able to give more honest evidence, but obviously with the flip side that would have made it even harder for us to piece the jigsaw together that I talked about earlier. If people did not get to know, that person who I thought was called Mark Stone was actually called Mark Kennedy. Now we know about Mark Kennedy, but how many others like that we do not know that this person was a spy cop, at which point, how can people piece together the evidence? And this inquiry is still incredibly frustrating in terms of not enabling people to piece together the jigsaw.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is absolutely key. I mean, there are so many people who were infiltrated who still have no idea, because this inquiry is just giving us a glimpse.
Yeah.
And you know, the vast majority of undercover officers who've been called and have been questioned about things that have been examined has come from what activists have exposed.
Yes.
And
have worked like crazy. I mean, I signed up to play my role in this 10 years ago. I had no idea how long it would take, how much work it would involve. And then there are other people who have been working absolutely flat out, you being one, who have done so much more, incredible tenacity from people in this movement to get the story out as best we can with the limited and impartial, incomplete pieces of the jigsaw that we've been presented with, and with the frustrations of not being able to share. I've got this piece of the jigsaw. Well, how does this fit with your piece of the jigsaw, or your? We've just been frustrated in our ability to piece it together, and other people who should have been, granted core participant status who were not, and therefore there's a whole load of other pieces of the jigsaw that have just not been revealed because those people were not named as core participants, and therefore the inquiry has not searched for documents that named them or their organisations. Therefore, we still have this very incomplete picture, and we're still all being denied our special branch, the contents of our special branch files.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you did a really good job of calling that out. I think it was very pointed, the fact that the lawyer complained that you mentioned that. I mean, it says everything really. You also suggested that the inquiry should have been calling Jay Jordan, who did one of these videos just yesterday.
Great.
I mean, again, so many people. Similar thing with Dave Smith. I mean, so many people who are right at the core. Heavily surveilled by undercover officers. The obvious person in many ways to call to give evidence to the inquiry not being called.
Yes.
And it feels like the inquiry is simply trying to avoid the work that will be involved with actually bringing people in who had that knowledge on those things.
Yeah, and it sort of also saddens me that I didn't get to, I was my visual attention was on counsel to the inquiry. I was not really able to kind of turn around and see how is this going down with the chair. Those of you watching probably have a better idea of how he was responding to my evidence today. But the one previous session I came to, he looked bored. He has heard all the evidence. He has signed off an interim report in which he acknowledged what the police themselves have acknowledged. Yes, it was wrong to be invading the privacy of the women who were spied on, who were duped into relationships. It was wrong that they were spying on social justice movements. It was wrong that they were taking the names of dead children and all those things. But they still have not acknowledged that it was wrong to claim that we were a threat of serious public disorder and therefore justified policing. So I really hope that I've engaged his brain cell on that today. I suspect that he signed up when he do you want to do this job? When he was asked whether he wanted to do this job, he probably thought that he would get to retire having made some recommendations about how to strike that balance between the need for covert surveillance, in at least in his eyes, versus the need to maintain some accountability and oversight of what the secret state is doing. And he probably thought his swan song of his career would be to write those recommendations and to be seen to do it. And the public inquiry has been strung out by delay after delay after delay. So he's now going to retire without getting that little moment in his sunset, in his moment of glory. And now he's bored. So I just hope I've managed to engage his interest in that crucial question. Was there a public order justification for what the spy cops did to us? And if I've engaged his brain cells on that question and have persuaded him that even that justification was not valid, I've done what I set out to do.
Yeah, I think you did a fantastic job of it. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back again this afternoon with GRD. There's been a couple of comments. Odie has shared the stream. Please, if you are able to share this stream, please do. Paul O'Connor from Undercurrents.
Hi, Paul.
Roger was incredible, very believable, and remembering all the actions from 30 years ago was amazing. Yeah, I mean, your memory was remarkably good. I have to be honest. I mean, so many quite small details in places, and when it was there was something that was brought up that you didn't immediately remember, you were given the reference and you were like, oh yes. I mean, very good recall.
Yeah. Well, Paul's played such a wonderful role in making sure that what we did was well documented, all those undercurrents videos of the M11 and so on. It's been really kind of heartwarming as part of the process of preparing for today to go back to my folder of Reclaim the Streets leaflet and meeting notes and press cuttings, but also to see some of the video material. And as you said earlier, for anybody for whom what was this Reclaim the Streets movement? I hadn't heard about it before. Do please have a look at those videos. They are just so beautiful and so inspiring. It was a wonderful thing to be part of that movement, which is exactly why, it's actually in some ways such a pleasure to have the opportunity to record all that stuff and to say what it really was in contrast to what the spy cops claimed it was.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just for those who don't know about undercurrents, I mean, it sounds almost unbelievable now, but it was a VHS that came out every couple of months that was like activist YouTube, I guess, of its time.
Love
really.
The description of it.
Yeah, and I mean, local groups around the country, including my own, would put on a night where we'd play this video and people would come along. And I mean, we do it multiple times actually, as we did different like Newport in Cardiff and so on. And that's what everybody was doing around the country, really. It was that way of disseminating information before the internet was a thing. I mean, we sound like we're describing a different world almost at this point, I think.
I know. I also kind of just got a little bit nostalgic when I talked in the inquiry about the days when we kind of disseminated our news of what was going on by stuffing envelopes. Like for how many activists for whom you put it out on social media have never heard of the idea of stuffing envelopes, but hey, I'm an old git.
Yeah. I mean, it was a huge part, right? A huge part of what we were doing. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us. I won't keep you any longer. We've been half an hour. We'll be back in fairly soon, actually. Oh God, in fact, back in 10 minutes.
You better
with
go.
GRD. Yes. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you all again this afternoon. Bye.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you so much.